I don't think that Martin Luther King was killed because he was advocating for the equality of the sexes. I think MLK's fatal flaw, as seen as a flaw from the powers that be, was advocating for democratic socialism over free market capitalism. I think that's why they took him out. And I say this as somebody who is currently learning way too much about history, kind of overwhelmed with information, and also an avid X Files watcher. I am an X Files stan. Mulder and Scully have me in a chokehold. And there was one episode of the X Files where the cigarette man revealed his past, and he's the one that took out MLK. And he said in that episode, he was like, I hated to do it. I actually loved MLK's message. But then he had to go and start talking about socialism, and we had to. We had to nip that in the bud. And when you see what he was saying about democratic socialism, you start to understand why they were freaking out. So MLK said that capitalism forgets that life is social and the kingdom of brotherhood is found neither in the thesis of communism nor the antithesis of capitalism, but in a higher synthesis. Instead of sitting here and reading all of this to you, I'll let you read it for yourself. You can pause and just take your time. The thing to understand about this country that we live in is that it is a nation made up of human beings, but run by sociopaths and psychopaths. And sociopaths and psychopaths do not concern themselves with things as trivial as race. They know that we concern ourselves with things as trivial as race, so they keep the machine going because it makes them money. But there is one thing that will always be more important to the United States government than racism, than misogyny, than patriotism, than nationalism, than religion, all of that, and that is money. Capitalism. We are fundamentally a capitalist nation. For now, the country was born and bred on capitalist hierarchy fueled by capitalism, and it necessitates the existence of poverty and the have-nots. And the theme, the pattern of rich fat cats from J.P. Morgan Chase all the way to Mark Zuckerberg, them like gorging themselves on exploitation of the poor, that has been a pattern that has stuck with this country throughout history, which is why the emancipation of slavery was emancipation without freedom, because it wasn't freedom that was waiting on them after they were emancipated. It was further exploitation, further legal manipulation. It's just that this time it was happening alongside poor whites too. And I tried to wrap this chapter up in the last video that I did on it, but I realized that I missed a major plot point in chapter 9 of A People's History of the United States, titled Slavery Without Submission, Emancipation Without Freedom. And I can't believe I was about to move on without pointing this major plot line out. I have already said before that slavery was not Lincoln didn't end slavery on paper, because again, the slaves very much freed themselves. Lincoln didn't end slavery on paper because he cared so much about black people and he had such a soft spot in his heart for enslaved African Americans. He did it because the South seceding threatened the Union's bottom line. The South had a ton of natural resources and power that the Northern Republicans, again, who were at the time the more liberal party, the Northern Republicans wanted access to. And so after slavery was done, there were about 10 years of social and political liberalism that benefited black people. And people know this as Reconstruction or Black Reconstruction. And it started in 1865 and ended in like 1876, 1877. And during this time, black men got the right to vote. Black people started, running for office. And because black men could now vote, there were now a ton of black people in Congress, both on a state and a federal level. And black people started enjoying all of these brand new freedoms that they had never been able to conceive of before. Like, there were a bunch of amendments passed, including a Civil Rights Act of 1875. This was a law that outlawed the exclusion of black people from hotels, theaters, railroads, and other public accommodations. So in the 1860s and 70s, everything that we know of today about black discrimination, like Jim Crow and black codes and chain convict leasing and all of that stuff, that came after Black Reconstruction. So there was a forward lurch that I think actually went way too fast, which is why it backslid as much as it did. But that forward lurch, they passed the 15th Amendment, which said that the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. The 14th Amendment repudiated the pre-war Dred Scott decision by declaring that all persons born or naturalized in the United States were citizens, basically saying, yeah, everybody that's born here, whether they're black, white, or other, are citizens, and you cannot interfere with the rights and privileges of a United States citizen. The whole nation, or like the whole government rather, as well as a lot of white abolitionists and freedom fighters and all black people, got swept up in this wave of liberalism. But the thing about it is they lost the plot. They forgot who this nation was. I think they forgot what the biggest elephant in the room was, and that is money. It's always money, right? So Howard Zinn writes, the American government had set out to fight the slave states in 1861, not to end slavery, but to retain the enormous national territory and market and resources. But the Civil War brought about all of these new crusades, like abolition and racial equality and like all types of shit. And so during the Reconstruction era, you suddenly saw the rise of public schools that didn't just benefit black people, it benefited the white kids too. And so now kids were starting to go to school, but alongside all of these progressive movements that were happening in the mid 19th century, white Southerners were getting more and more enraged that they had lost their slaves and therefore lost billions of dollars in profit. And so white Southerners started doing what white people do best and just like committing acts of mass violence against black people, because how dare you be free? You will either be a slave or you will die, which was basically like their mindset. And so all of these riots start happening and they start kicking black people out of Congress. And actually, I'm going to read to you the speech of Henry McNeil Turner. And he escaped from slavery in South Carolina at the age of 15. He taught himself to read and write and read law books while he was a messenger in a lawyer's office, and read medical books while he was a handyman at a Baltimore medical school. And he basically just had an excellent career. But he read this speech in 1868 because he was a senator in the Georgia legislature, and they basically just told him that they were going to oust him because he was black. And he says, Mr. Speaker, I wish the members of this House to understand the position that I take. I hold that I am a member of this body. Therefore, sir, I shall neither fawn nor cringe before any party, nor stoop to beg them for my rights. I am here to demand my rights and to hurl thunderbolts at the men who would dare to cross the threshold of my manhood. The scene presented in this House today is one unparalleled in the history of the world. Never in the history of the world has a man been arraigned before a body clothed with legislative, judicial, or executive functions, charged with the offense of being a darker hue than his fellow men. It has remained for the state of Georgia, in the very heart of the 19th century, to call a man before the bar and there charge him with an act for which he is no more responsible than for the head which he carries upon his shoulders. The Anglo-Saxon race, sir, is a most surprising one. I was not aware that there was in the character of that race so much cowardice or so much pusillanimity. I tell you, sir, that this is a question which will not die today. This event shall be remembered by posterity for ages yet to come, and while the sun shall continue to climb the hills of heaven. We are told that if black men want to speak, they must speak through white trumpets. If black men want their sentiments expressed, they must be adulterated and sent through white messengers, who will quibble and equivocate and evade as rapidly as the pendulum of a clock. The great question, sir, is this: am I a man? If I am such, I claim the rights of a man. Why, sir, though we are not white, we have accomplished much. We have pioneered civilization here. We have built up your country. We have worked in your fields and garnered your harvest for 250 years. And what do we ask of you in return? Do we ask you for compensation for the sweat our fathers bore for you? For the tears you have caused, and the hearts you have broken, and the lives you have curtailed, and the blood you have spilled? Do we ask for retaliation? We ask it not. We are willing to let the dead past bury its dead, but we ask you now for our rights. There were white teachers teaching little black children in the South, northern white teachers who had come down teaching their children about, teaching their students about like racial equality. Last example that I'm going to give is a speech that Sojourner Truth gave at the American Equal Rights Association, where she talked about the rights of black women alongside black men, and this is like one of the early examples of intersectionality. She says, this is what Sojourner Truth says. She says, there is a great stir about colored men getting their rights, but not a word about the colored women. And if colored men get their rights and not colored women theirs, you see, the colored men will be masters over the women, and it will be just as bad as it was before. So I am for keeping the thing going while things are stirring, because if we wait till it is still, it will take a great while to get it going again. I am above 80 years old. It is about time for me to be going. I have been 40 years a slave and 40 years free, and would be here 40 more years to have equal rights for all. I suppose I am kept here because something remains for me to do. I suppose I am yet to help break the chain. I have done a great deal of work, as much as a man, but did not get so much pay. I used to work in the field and bind grain, keeping with the cradler, meaning while holding the baby. But men doing no more got twice as much pay. I suppose I am about the only colored woman that goes about to speak for the rights of the colored women. I want to keep the thing stirring now that the ice is cracked. So it was a time of great social progress. But here's the thing, and this is the whole reason for me making this video. The federal government didn't have so much of an issue with social progress and liberal movements. Not so much. I mean, there were individuals here and there, like Andrew Johnson, who became president after Lincoln was killed, who like rolled back and tried to sabotage black rights and all of that shit. Like, there were people in the government, obviously, who were just racist and didn't want black people to have rights. But for the most part, the northern elites, the northern businessmen, people like Charles Tiffany, aka Tiffany and Company, Breakfast at Tiffany's, people like J.P. Morgan Chase, they didn't really give a fuck about racism. What they were concerned about was the investments in the South and how much money they could make if they teamed up with the South. So the North and the South teamed up together because the South had just lost billions of dollars because they lost all their slaves, and the North wanted more money, more opportunity, more resources, more land, more manufacturing, more workers, especially. So the North and the South, they teamed up together and basically said, okay, so this is what the northern elites were thinking. They were like, okay, we have two options. We can either align ourselves with the interest of black Americans, newly freed ex-slaves who have no money and no power and only have the right to vote and the right to run for office and stuff if Northern Union soldiers enforce it. So they basically need our help in order to get on their feet, but they can't do anything for us in return other than vote for us. So we have that. And then over here, we have, my nose is running because I'm like sitting outside and it's cold. Over here, we have Southern white elites and like people with a lot of money who can fund us. Like, we can make a ton of money off these people. So the Supreme Court and the federal government were like, okay, it would be a smarter political move for us to align ourselves with the white supremacists of the South than the newly freed black people with no resources. So the Supreme Court started rolling back a bunch of the laws that were passed during Reconstruction, including the Civil Rights Act of 1875, which claimed that discrimination against black people in public spaces was illegal. The Supreme Court rolled that back and then implemented Plessy versus Ferguson, which made segregation legal. And so they basically started aligning themselves with the white supremacists of the South because it was a smart business move. There was issues over the election in 1877. Actually, it was the year before. So the presidential election of 1876, it was hotly contested because the Democratic candidate, they were the conservatives at the time, he won the popular vote but lost the electoral vote, and the Northern elites wanted Rutherford B. Hayes to be the president. And so they basically talked the South out of going for president by saying, hey, okay, if you let us have the presidency, if you let Hayes become president, we are going to remove the Union troops from the South, stop enforcing civil rights, and you could just deal with the black people however you want. So they sold us up the river for their own political gain. That coal in the South had iron all through Alabama, Tennessee, and Georgia. And so once the Northern elites and the Southern elites decided to team up together so that the South could make its money back and the North could make even more money, suddenly J.P. Morgan starts buying up railroads all through the South and investing in Southern manufacturers and businesses, enriching the Southern white supremacists who used to be the slave owners. And so black people started fleeing the South because the violence against them was unmatched. And like the white people were basically trying to tell them, like, we're still in control down here and there's nothing you can do. And so this is when the Great Migration starts to kick off, because black people are like, fuck that, I'm getting out of here. And the same people who held them as slaves now owned the railroads, now owned the courts, now owned the police stations, now owned the schools, now owned everything, because the North put that power right back in their hands because it was beneficial for them financially, monetarily. Booker T. Washington, he was basically trying to preach passivity by trying to tell black people, don't agitate them too much, just play your role, keep your head down, work hard, and don't try to like bring up any agitating conversations about equality, because these white people are not trying to hear that. So some people thought that Booker T. Washington was a coon, and W.E.B. Du Bois was one of the only ones who saw what was really happening, which was the rise of a new system of capitalism. A new enslavement of labor, except this time it implicated immigrants and poor white people. So it went from black people only being the slaves to now poor white people and immigrants were also being slaves. And poor white people already didn't have it good to start out. It just got worse for them after the emancipation of slavery. And he started talking about how all over the world, in all different types of countries, politicians started getting bribed and bought into the united exploitation of white, yellow, brown, and black labor. The most important thing to take away from this section of the chapter is this. Any threat to capitalism, the United States sees as a threat to its lifeline, as a blow to the heart of what the United States government is. So what's happening right now with Zohran Mamdani and like multiple, like millions of people everywhere starting to call for more democratic socialism and more socialist policies, if you really want to make that work, you have to crash capitalism. You have to burn it down. And you have to do that by refusing to partake in Christmas shopping unless you're going to support small, minority-owned, woman-owned businesses, or just small businesses in general that just normal people are operating. Stay the fuck away from the corporations. Stay the fuck away from any corporations that have played in our faces about DEI. Any corporations like that. If you must shop at a corporation, go to Costco. The people in the 19th century were not organized enough, they were not enfranchised enough, they were not educated enough to fully bring down American capitalism and introduce a new system. And so their reconstruction got co-opted by the elites and the government that were basically trying to convince them that the slaves were free now, nothing more to see, and really they just turned around and enslaved everybody else with backroom deals. I don't think that that's going to be able to happen this time, because women have more power, black people have more power, immigrants even have more power, and we can keep our eyes on them and keep your eyes on the ball. The most important thing is that capitalism, more than anything else, more than racism, more than misogyny, is the true enemy. This is why MLK was killed. And I need to be careful with these messages, because the powers that be, all that racial equality shit, they don't care about that. What they care about is maintaining the system of capitalism so that they can continue to gorge themselves on our exploitation. And we are now closer than ever to crashing the system of capitalism, but we have to stay focused, and we cannot allow their bots, their political propaganda, or their chaos and smoke and mirrors to distract us from the real enemy. The real enemy is capitalism.